Next on our program, we're going to focus on innovation, part 1, with Fred Walti, President and CEO, Network for Global Innovation. Fred is the co-founder of the LA Cleantech Incubator, LACI, and current president of the Network for Global Innovation. He will share his work on developing ecosystems with a unique focus on activating innovation within the region.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this very important broadcast, especially today's subject being innovation. I thought I'd speak a little bit about what it's like to be an entrepreneur and what an entrepreneur contributes to innovation and what that whole journey is like. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey from being a motorcycle racer to being a clean tech entrepreneur. I think maybe what I'll do is start at the end. For 6 years, I was the CEO of the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, which led the city of LA's effort to build an innovation hub around clean technologies and green economy. And we started in Skid Row, literally in a garage in Skid Row. And over a period of about 6 or 7 years, we built that program into a world-class innovation hub focused on sustainable technologies. And through that program, of course, I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. But if you ask me, well, who am I? What I would say to you is that I'm really, first and foremost, an entrepreneur. I just kind of like building things and starting things. And I've started companies in everywhere from software to RVs, as an example. And I spend a great deal of my time, at least pre-COVID, I spent a lot of my time traveling around the world and evangelizing the power of unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit into economic development and making the world a better place. So for you entrepreneurs out there, you know that we're kind of a little bit of a different kind of a breed. You know? Entrepreneurs are different. Well, how are we different? Well, first of all, we start things. You know, we often start things and we don't know where we're going to end. We don't know if we're going to be successful. I've started 11 companies. I didn't know when I started those 11 companies whether they would be successful or not, but I had a passion for the idea and I was willing to take the risk, and I just felt compelled to go forward. So the first thing entrepreneurs do is they start things, even though they may not know where they end up. The second thing, of course, is if you're an entrepreneur, you try things. That's kind of the name of the game, is we try to invent companies or invent things from ideas and creativity. And I like the quote from Thomas Edison, who said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. And that's really the entrepreneurial life, is that we try things and we, of course, pivot when we have to. But unlike much of the world, if we try and fail or find things that didn't work, we're not thrown in jail or disgraced from our families. Here in the US, we have an entrepreneurial background. We have an entrepreneurial culture that in fact says, okay, you failed once, or it didn't work once, you have a chance to try again. But starting and trying is one thing. You know, the end result is we really have to build something, don't we? We have to build companies. And so that's what the entrepreneurs do. My 11 attempts at building companies in the software, internet, clean tech, RV, motorcycle business, one out of those 11 companies was successful, made a great deal of money, and the rest did not. And so I think I probably have lived the agony of defeat and the thrill of victory that entrepreneurs go through. But the fulfilling nature of building a company is one that is hard to describe for those who haven't tried or haven't done it. In LACI today, there are entrepreneurs that are working on building battery technology and energy efficiency technology, ag tech, transportation companies. So there's a full range of companies that we're working on. And finally, start, try, build is okay, but generate, that's really what we need to do. It's generating, as in money, generating revenue. In fact, the companies at LACI have generated about $250 million of new revenue for the city of Los Angeles. And as you probably don't know, but all net new jobs created in the United States in the last 40 years, all of those jobs were created by companies of less than 5 years old. So entrepreneurs not only start, try, build, and generate money, but they also generate jobs. And they're the best way, in fact, of creating jobs. But, you know, I didn't really know when I was a young kid what I wanted to do. I didn't have the slightest idea, actually. And when I was, most of us when we were young, we were trying to figure out what to focus on in school. Like everybody, I didn't really know. And so and my family had no history of being entrepreneurs. My dad was a factory worker. And my brother and I were the first ones in our family to have a college education. And so when I was trying to figure out what to major in school, my dad gave me my first piece of advice. And he said, son, the only way to make something of yourself is to become an engineer. And so, because I love my dad and I didn't have a better idea, I said, okay, I'll try to become an engineer. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted to two universities, one Harvard and the other University of California at Berkeley. And I went to Berkeley because that was a better engineering school, of course. Well, things didn't really work out that well. I didn't do very well at Berkeley for a number of reasons, three of which were sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I got into that, of course, and having fun. But my heart really wasn't in it. I didn't really want to be an engineer. I didn't really want to go to school. What I wanted to do was become a motorcycle racer because I had motorcycles and I'd like to go fast, and I was brought up in Indianapolis, so it just seemed natural. But I was frankly petrified of dropping out of school and becoming a motorcycle racer, not the least of which is because my parents had worked so hard to get me into school, and I felt that I'd break their heart and probably be disowned. And about that time, my older brother, Randall, came to town, and San Francisco, and he took me out to a very fancy restaurant. When you're in school, you don't get a chance to eat in very fancy restaurants very often. So I even remember that restaurant. And he gave me the next piece of life-changing advice. And he said, Freddie, live your own life. Don't worry about what others think, but take responsibility for what you do, however it turns out. And I took that advice and I dropped out of school. And I went and started to become a motorcycle racer. It took my mother a lot of years to forgive my brother for giving me that advice. But for a period of about 5 years, I was a professional motorcycle racer. And I did fairly well at this motorcycle racing. And I learned a lot about it, if you can believe that. And racing, it really kind of set the pace for the rest of my life. First thing I learned is that I like to win. I won about 70 races, and once you get a taste of winning, you really, really like it. And in racing and in other sports, it's pretty easy to tell who was the winner. The winner is the guy that crosses the finish line first, that gets the checkered flag. You're the winner. And so I really, really enjoyed winning. And that focused my mind on always trying to win in life. Of course, the other part of racing is that when you make a mistake in racing motorcycles, you fall off usually. And when you fall off, you often break bones. And so I had to pick myself up a lot of times, literally and figuratively, and get back on the bike to get repaired, repair my motorcycle. So I became pretty determined on how to succeed in terms of never giving up and always picking myself up after mistakes. So I was pretty successful at racing, loved it. But guess what? I realized I was never going to get to the top of the motorcycle world. There is, by the way, a top of the motorcycle world, and there, I wish to this day I could have been there, but that just wasn't in the cards for me. It wasn't good enough. So I decided to go to another, perhaps even more dangerous occupation called advertising. And so I entered the advertising world. I worked at global advertising agencies in New York for big advertising agencies, big accounts. And no, it was nothing like the television show Mad Men. There was no drinking at lunch or none of that. It was a lot of hard work. And, I was a kid literally fresh off of racing motorcycles. And I didn't know anything about the business world. And here I was in Madison Avenue, competing once again against young people who had Ivy League educations, were really well-connected, smart, bright, dressed well. And I was really petrified on whether I could, in fact, succeed or not against them. I was scared. And so my father gave me the next piece of really world-changing advice. And he said, son, don't be so afraid of failing that you don't try. And, after he told me that, I just kind of relaxed. I said, all right, I may not fail, but I'm going to give it a heck of a try. And I became a very determined young man in the business world. And in fact, that launched my business career. I became very successful in the advertising business, very successful in business, and I climbed the business ladder as a result of all of this experience and learning that I gotten to that point. And looking back on my career, I've really been fortunate to take part in 3 technology revolutions that have really changed how we live and how we work. And I'd like to just take you through a little bit of them. The first one, of course, was the personal computer. Yes, there is something before the iPhone, and it was called the Macintosh. And this changed everything. You could literally iterate. You could draw things. It was just a wonderful piece of technology that changed everything. And I was able to. I ran the Apple computer account on a worldwide basis. It was a very big account, very big job, and Apple in those days was very, very successful. Yet I learned something really importantly from them, and I learned that arrogance can be a killer. Because Apple was arrogant. Apple thought they had everything together. They didn't really have to tell you why their product was best. It was just going to give you the power to be your best. And that's all you really needed to know. And no, Apple didn't really have to pay attention to any of the competition. For instance, that little company called Microsoft, and the fact that they were introducing a piece of software that looked a lot like Apple's software called Windows. Wasn't nearly as good, but Apple didn't really think that they had to address that. All they had to do was, we're Apple. We are the best, the brightest. They were the best, the brightest, as they probably are today. But because they didn't, because they were arrogant and didn't take their competition very seriously, Microsoft and Windows ate Apple for lunch, and they almost went out of business. Steve Jobs left the company, and they came very, very close to going out of business. The second technology revolution I've been a part of was the internet, of course. By this time, I had achieved some kind of a reputation for understanding technology, about understanding where technology, how it can impact and change businesses and lives. And I was the creator of one of the very first interactive divisions of an advertising agency. And at some stage of the game, I formed one of my first companies, which was an interactive, an internet architect, where we worked with large companies to figure out how to use the internet. And this was in the mid-90s, so nobody really understood anything about the internet. And it was never going to be very big, of course, because nobody would even use their credit card on the internet, because it would be way too dangerous. So we started this little company in out of my house in the Hollywood Hills. And we got our first big break was we got a big client called Universal Studios. And Universal Studios hired us to analyze their business and to tell them, is there a future for us in the internet? And so we spent 6 months, and we literally met with the entire Universal Studio management team and all their divisions, and we analyzed it. And because this was really an important assignment for us. And we then completed our analysis and presented them with a plan this thick. And I remember getting in front of their all of the management team to present our findings, and it came down to the end, and the biggest question was, well, how big of a business would this be for Universal? And we said, well, we think within 5 years, the internet can represent $500 million worth of revenue to you as part of your business. And this was in the mid-90s, of course. And they almost literally laughed us out of the room. We, in fact, never did any more business with Universal. They thought we were, in fact, crazy that it could be $500 million worth of business. And of course, we were both wrong, weren't we? First of all, the internet has changed the entertainment business, all aspects of the entertainment business, totally. Okay. And of course, we were wrong too. It was way too small. Today, I think Google probably does $500 million worth of advertising revenue in 1 week. So it was a great learning experience of being part of the internet and how it evolved. And over time, we built a very successful company called Full Moon Interactive, and we grew it to a couple hundred people and 7 or 8 offices around the world. We had a great time as a terrific company. Then my wife and I decided to do some traveling, and we were in South America riding our motorcycle, because I liked touring on motorcycles. And we were in, I remember this very clearly, we were in Bolivia, in the capital of Bolivia called La Paz, on a Sunday morning. And I remember getting a call that Sunday morning. I was a little slow to get the call because we'd had a pretty fun evening before, because it was Carnival in Bolivia. And so I got a call from the City of Los Angeles Mayor's office, and they asked me, would I be interested in creating, helping them build a Cleantech Incubator to help City of Los Angeles build a green economy. And I had no intention of leaving my motorcycle. We were kind of in midstream, but this was really kind of a unique opportunity. And it was a unique opportunity for a couple reasons. First of all, it allowed me to live my personal dream, which is to do something good. Because what we were focusing on was not a new iPhone app, but in fact, to try to fight climate change and build a green economy. And the kinds of products and technologies we were going to build would do good, would be good for not only Los Angeles, but the world. How can you not have fun helping entrepreneurs build things, okay, and create things? And so doing good and having fun, those are 2 really important things in my mind. And then, of course, the third thing is make money. And yes, you could do all 3 of those things: do good, have fun, make money, in one thing called clean technology. So I accepted the challenge. It took me literally 3 weeks to ride my motorcycle to a port where I could ship it back home. Got back to Los Angeles and started to on the journey of the 3rd technology revolution, the clean technology revolution. And I think it's a revolution that's still just beginning. It's actually a huge opportunity for those of you out there thinking about, well, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I would highly recommend that you think about clean tech. It's a very broad business, of course. It's everything from sustainable energy generation to storage to transportation to agriculture to the built environment. And the good news is, it's still a very, very fast growing business. In fact, it's the fastest growing business in the world for the last 5 years. Just one of those sectors, that icon there with the picture of the windmill, wind power, has been growing at 30% a year for the last 5 years. There are people who predict that all of our energy will be from renewable sources within the next 10 to 15 years. So it's really a huge opportunity, and it's one that allows one to have fun, do good, and make some money. So I'd like to take you through a very quick case history of how we did that for Los Angeles. You know, the City of Los Angeles asked us to build a incubator, and we started, as I mentioned, in this bus repair garage in downtown LA. This is the very first day. This is what the building looked like. And I can remember standing there. I'm the one with the camera here. And I'm saying to myself, what did I get myself into here? So this is in 2011. We built a nonprofit, formed a nonprofit with the City of Los Angeles and other stakeholders in LA. We had 3 people, and we recruited 2 companies in the beginning. But we had no experience whatsoever in incubation. We didn't know what incubators really were supposed to do. But we did know, and so we had to kind of invent a new way of going about it, because we knew one thing, okay? And perhaps the most important thing, and that's what we knew what entrepreneurs needed to build their businesses, because we had been and were entrepreneurs. So our whole theme was for entrepreneurs, by entrepreneurs. And we recruited very experienced people to help our portfolio companies with very practical kinds of items. So we had a team of very experienced entrepreneurs who really understood the nuts and bolts of building a company. And then we built programming. I really call it kind of like a real world university. This is not something that you can learn in business school, although I highly recommend going to business school. The kinds of things we would look at is, well, how do you evaluate a term sheet for an investment? How do you form a board of directors? How do you really get into market? And how do you develop a pilot for a Department of Water and Power? So we had the right people, and we had good programming. And of course, eventually we had to have the right facilities. So we moved out of that bus repair garage after 5 years. And we built a specific facility for clean tech entrepreneurs, focused on a prototyping center, chemistry lab, electronics lab, all of the various things that clean tech entrepreneurs need to succeed. And we built that and opened that up in 2016. And the results of that program to that time have been pretty good for LACI. We've generated $620 some odd million worth of long-term economic value for the city of LA. We've helped over 120 entrepreneurs, and they've attracted $228 million worth of investment. It's also worked out pretty well for the city of Los Angeles. The city of LA has more clean tech startups than anywhere else in the country. It has more clean tech jobs in terms of growth. We buy more cars, so that we have a real ecosystem that supports clean technology entrepreneurship and growth. In 2017, I decided that I'd taken the organization as far as I could take it and wanted to take it. And I was really focused on another part of this. I really believe that all of our companies had great technology, but perhaps their technologies had a bigger market outside of the US. So I formed a company called the Network for Global Innovation. The Network for Global Innovation is this network of incubators, accelerators around the world. In fact, we have 28 members in 14 countries. We work in probably another dozen countries. So we with entrepreneurs around the world to help them get to market and to help the ecosystems in these various markets build up. And so that's what we've been working on recently, is the Network for Global Innovation. And that's given me the opportunity to travel the world and to see what entrepreneurs are like around the world. And, you know, when I started, I was a pretty arrogant guy. And I would go to all these places and I thought, well, only entrepreneurs in California, that's the only where the good entrepreneurs could be. But I'd go to places like Ethiopia, which is a very developing country, and I'd find wonderful entrepreneurs there too. And so I became a believer that what we needed to do was support, to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit around the world to, in fact, attack climate change in a much more aggressive manner. And that's what we do for in the Network for Global Innovation. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of the thoughts in this journey, and what it's mean to me, and hopefully what it can help you. First takeaway is take your own path. Don't be afraid to zig when you zag. Okay? You need to do what you think is right for you. Don't let people tell you differently. Don't be afraid to fail. You will fail. Failing is part of learning. Okay? But you need to fail fast, and you need to learn something. Just like when you take your own path, you have to take responsibility for how that ended up. So for instance, when I went to be a motorcycle racer for 5 years, I understood pretty quickly that when I got back into the real world jobs, I was 5 years older than everybody else. You know, I went and got my degree. I was an old man by the time I went to. So you have to accept the responsibility for your own action, but you need to take your own path. You need not to be afraid to fail. You need just to fail fast. Entrepreneurship is all about passion and risk taking. You got to be really excited about something. And you have to be willing to take the risk. And if you're able to do that, and you're able to do it well, the money will come. Okay? The money from being a successful entrepreneur will follow the success of your passion and risk taking. Don't listen to all the critics, of course. There are many, many people that will tell you you can't succeed, it won't work, It's not worth trying, but you got to ignore those. You got to follow your own heart. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pivot every once in a while or change depending upon the market. Remember, 1 out of 11 is my track record. So obviously 10 times didn't work. And I needed to do something differently. But take your own path. Don't be afraid to fail. Passion and risk-taking are all about being an entrepreneur. And don't listen to all of the critics. And finally, do good, have fun, make money. That's my mantra. I hope it will become yours in the future. And I look forward to talking with you and answering your questions in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hello again, everyone. Rachel Singer with WRCOG. And just as another reminder for those who would like to submit a question, be sure to go to the slido.com app or scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen and type in the code #3. And if by chance we do not get to your question in the allotted time, we'll be archiving them and then reaching out to our speakers, and in this case, Fred, to provide a written response, and we'll send that after the webinar for additional information. So Fred, thank you so much for being a part of our broadcast today. To kick off the live Q&A section, I'm curious, and I want to pick your brain a little bit about the entrepreneurial experience of start, try, build, and generate. So what is local government's role in really fostering these efforts?
Oh, you're going to start with a tough question, are you? Okay, so I think local government has a number of roles to play. First of all, I think local government, if they want to be entrepreneurial, they have to not only talk the talk, they have to walk the walk. They have to be entrepreneurial. So for instance, in the city of Riverside, it's a very innovative approach to one-stop shop to get a permit done. It's a very unique, innovative approach. Well, I think that kind of spirit of being innovative within your government is really important, because that signals to people that a government is willing to take a look at and consider new ideas and new approaches. Of course, the second thing is that we have to welcome entrepreneurs, don't we? You know, we have to make it known that the leadership of a city wants entrepreneurship, wants innovation, and is willing to go out and help that and put together programs. Just like we have programs to help attract certain kinds of real estate projects and so forth, cities need to put together programs to attract entrepreneurs and innovation. And part of that, of course, is the third part, which is always the toughest part, which is investment. And in addition to investing roads and in building infrastructure and roads and so forth, we have to invest in innovation infrastructure, which is helping the programming and the access to investment of organizations like Site and Marietta Incubator. They need as much support as they possibly can. And so I think that government can provide that kind of support, but also lead the way in terms of talking about it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like government's role is really to create more welcoming channels for entrepreneurs to do what they do best, start, try, build, and generate. So can you talk about your experience with working with this region specifically in Riverside County and the greater Inland Empire, and how we can foster greater collaboration here locally?
Well, as you know, of course, we've had the pleasure of working with WRCOG and the greater Inland Empire region now for, I don't know, 6-9 months about what's the right way to develop an innovation strategy for the region. And one of the things that we did was, of course, we took a look at what the assets were that are available now. And, you know, I'm from Los Angeles and many people from LA, you know, we only see the Inland Empire as we drive through it, and you know, we don't really know a lot about it. And this gave me the opportunity, and our team the opportunity to really get to know what's out in the Inland Empire. And I was thrilled. I was surprised. I was thrilled. You know, there are 1,000 technology companies looking for investment. There are a couple of dozen really good innovation assets that are really good programs. But that was the good news. The bad news is, of course, not many of them work together. They're not really well funded, and therefore they're not reaching their opportunities, their potential. So what the best thing that we could do is to figure out a way of coordinating all of this innovation access together through a hub and spoke network so that people are working together. So for instance, the Excite Accelerator, maybe it's companies need access to customers or investors or people that help them do a pilot study within the city. Well, there needs to be an ongoing, specific, dedicated effort to make those kinds of things happen, to cross-pollinate, so that we start to act like a region. That would be my biggest recommendation in terms of what we have to do in terms of working with our current assets. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are some new things we need to do, of course, but really it's how do we harness what we have? How do we coordinate it? And how do we drive it towards an innovation economy for the future?
Mm-hmm. And so now with your experience in LA County, obviously, and then also now with Riverside County, what are some of the differentiating, I guess, identifiers or benefits of the IE as opposed to LA?
Well, it's a different, it's just a different place. You know, LA is much larger, both in physical size and population, depending upon how you want to measure it. It's between 5 and 10 million people. And that has its challenges because there are lots of different constituencies within that. The Inland Empire, smaller, but it's more spread out, and it has a higher number of smaller organizations. And I think that's a strength because I think that brings a diversity to the projects and the philosophy that's not always apparent. You know, the Inland Empire has a heritage and tradition of underserved communities, and that today is a strength. What we need to do is take advantage of that and bring that into so that entrepreneurial ventures reflect thinking, reflect those capabilities and that point of view. And I think that's unique. I think it's different, and I think it's a real potential.
So when approaching innovation from more of like a broad scale perspective, some would vouch to focus on pre-established industries and innovation in those industries for a region. However, there are other industries like Cleantech that we don't yet have in the IE, but could lead to leaps and bounds in innovation. So do you think that it's most advantageous for the IE to pivot and see what a future in Cleantech could look like? Or do you think that we should build off of past and present industries that we are established in, like logistics, transportation of goods, agriculture, and the like?
Well, I'm going to give you the answer, yes and no. So, generally speaking, I believe that you need to build from your strength. You know, you have to take what you're good at and go from there. So the IE has certain industries and technologies that it has a head start in. And so from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to double down on that and to take that to another level. The other side of the coin is you really want to always build towards the future. And the future in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years is sustainable technology of one kind or another. Okay? Those are the highest growth areas. So by definition, you kind of want to also put your paddle in the river and go with that, because that's going to be a growth industry. Every city in the world will need to get more sustainable. So the question for the IE and the cities within IE are you going to buy it or are you going to build it? Now, that's the question that we're all going for. So I think it's a combination of both. I think you've got to really make sure you have a good strategic fit with what you are and your strengths, but you also have to look to where the future is going. And then, of course, my third answer, part of that answer is it doesn't make any difference. That what we really want to do is find great entrepreneurs, great ideas, great companies in whatever industry they're in, and help them and double down on them, help them grow their business, and that will attract similarly minded, innovative businesses. And so I think that's kind of, it's a tricky thing, but every city is wrestling with that question.
Definitely. So we have a question from the audience that we'll highlight. So what do you think are some of the biggest barriers for entrepreneurs, and should government have a role in removing those barriers?
Well, the biggest barriers are money, 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 and money. Finding investment capital at early stage. Okay? For those that deserve it. There are a lot of people looking for money. They're probably not going to find it because their ideas aren't good enough or they're not far enough down the road. But there are a lot of great ideas, a lot of great potential companies out there that are looking for investment, but because they're not located in Northern California, close to Sand Hill Road, which is where all the VCs are, they're going to have a harder time to find that. And so part of what government needs to do is it needs to be innovative and attract and build new sources of investment funding for companies. Okay, I think that's a role for government, is to in fact provide investment funding for early stage companies. And there's a whole range of ways that one needs to do that. It's not willy-nilly, but so one role for government is, and the hurdle is investment funding. The solution is for government to make a very specific initiative in those areas. Second barrier, of course, is access to customers. And especially, we're talking about the sustainable technology world and clean tech and so forth. In that world, you often have to do trials and pilots with city organizations or utilities. So the ability to do a trial within a city to get a reference customer for a entrepreneur is a really important thing. And the city and cities, plural, can do that through early adopter programs that can welcome and make it easier and perhaps even pay part of the cost of doing trials for new technologies. That knowing that most of those will not work, but a couple of them will work. And those will, of course, really move the ball forward. I think that the cities need to think about how they zone buildings so that buildings can be rehabilitated in a less expensive way so that entrepreneurs can use those buildings and rather than build new ones. And there's a whole kind of thing.
So I want to zero in a little bit on what you said, the first point, which was investment funding as a barrier for entrepreneurs. So as a very basic question, do we in the Inland Empire have that investment funding even available? Like, do we have, similar to what you were sharing about LA?
Well, the answer is yes, you have it available, but you're not, chances are it's not being harnessed in such a way. The Inland Empire is a very wealthy community. Okay? It has a lot of resources, a lot of institutions that have made money, that have significant capabilities, but they haven't to date been targeted and tailored towards early stage investment, and that's what needs to take place. What I think the misnomer has been, and it's been when I was talking to folks there's this misnomer of thinking that if we could just get a venture capitalist to get on an airplane at San Francisco and fly into Ontario and have him come out and take a look at our companies, that he or she would make that investment, and that's it. Well, that's just not going to happen. It just really is not going to happen. But we really have to conclude that we have to build our own. We have to roll our own investment funds and vehicles. And there are a lot of really interesting new ways of doing that are not hugely expensive, that reduce the risk, but in fact give the lifeblood of investment to the area's entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. So we have another question from the audience. How can we better train our youth or inspire them to choose a path of being an entrepreneur? And this even goes back to the conversation earlier with Dr. Munoz when he was talking about entrepreneurship as a way to address automation as well.
Well, this is a favorite subject of mine. That it's a favorite subject. It's not one that I'm necessarily an expert in, but entrepreneurship is more than just building companies. In fact, that's just one outlet. When you come back and talk about what entrepreneurs do, and they start things and they try things and they try to build things. Well, how many people in today's world would that be beneficial to, irrespective of whether they're trying to start a company or not? I think that is, in fact, the key requirement for future-proofing our young folks in our workforce, is to become much more entrepreneurial in spirit. What do I mean? First of all, learn how to solve all different kinds of problems. The first thing that entrepreneurs do is they end up being faced with new problems they've never faced every day, and they somehow figure out how to solve those to some degree. Well, that's what each of us need to do, because my dad, as I mentioned, was a factory worker for 20 years. He knew where he was going to work every day. He knew pretty much what he was going to do. He tried to do a good job. He progressed up the ladder, but he knew. Well, very few people I know, that's the situation. It's always going to be uncertain. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be changing. And so part of being an entrepreneur is having the confidence through experience in solving those problems that come up, so that one becomes much more flexible on what the situation is and what the environment is like. So I think, and I don't think you start that in college. I think you start that in K through 12 and STEM. I mean, I think it's a real mindset change.
I would agree. It's a posture of how you approach challenges.
Let me just one more thing, and then I'll okay. So as I mentioned, my family was from a factory working, and then my brother was the first part of our family who started his own company. He was an aerospace engineer, and he started his own company. And all of a sudden, I realized that the family outings were taking place at his house, not mom and dad's house, because his house was bigger, and he had nicer cars. And all of a sudden, I said, "Oh, well, maybe I could do that." Gee, if my brother succeeded as being an entrepreneur, maybe I could do. Well, now that's true for everybody who doesn't have family members who are entrepreneurs. They don't know they can do it. So part of what needs to be done is to show examples and to have role models to let young people know that it's a possibility. Then, of course, training and help and mentorship is important. Okay. I told you it was a favorite section.
Those are great points. And so I kind of have a follow-up question to that, because the idea of risk, I think, is very intimidating to a lot of people. So what inspires you to be courageous in spite of risk and to take those next steps towards something that has the potential may not turn out exactly how you envision it to be?
It's called cost control. I've lived my life within my means, so that I was never far in debt, so that if I had to lose my job or if I could take a risk, I could in fact live for a week or two or whatever. So cost control is a really important part of it, is being able, it's hard to take a risk if you can't feed yourself, okay? But if you have a little bit of time, okay, it's easier to take a risk. Because of that, I have never, ever been afraid of being fired. Okay? Now, I didn't want to, and I've been fired a couple of times, but I wanted to do it. I wanted to do what was right, and I had the guts to do that, partially because I knew I had a little bit of savings, but if something went wrong, I could still feed my family. So cost control is really an important part of this whole thing.
So another question from the audience, let me highlight it. What was the most difficult part in setting up LACI? What were some of the best practices that you learned?
Well, the most difficult part was to convince people it could be done, because back in those days, nobody really understood that the creation of new companies was in fact the best way of creating new jobs. So when we talked to folks about helping to fund this organization as an economic development strategy, they didn't understand that. They thought that an economic development strategy was in fact community infrastructure and so forth. So getting the word out was a really important part. And I tell the story often that in the first year, I went through 1,500 business cards. And I'm doing the math, it's 4 or 5 a day, because I went to everybody I could even think of and spoke in front of any and every group, talking about what the advantage of, what the vision, why we should be doing this. So marshaling people to, in fact, make that happen was a very difficult thing. There are lots of key learnings, but one of the things that I learned, and these are things that I didn't cause to happen. So for instance, one of the key to LACI's success is it's an independent organization. It's not run by the City of Los Angeles or the Department of Water and Power. Both of those organizations funded it, okay, or others. It's an independent organization that allows it to move quickly and be a objective arbiter of innovation. The second part was we started literally in a bus repair garage in right next to Skid Row, and it was a pretty shabby place. And because it was such a shabby place, we focused on how can we add value via programming. So we spent the first 5 years on programming, on how to help entrepreneurs, and we ignored what the physical surroundings were. And 5 years later, when we launched the LACI Innovation Campus, which is a 60,000 square foot Taj Mahal Cleantech, everybody walks in and says, "Oh, this is terrific." Well, if we had had that in the beginning, we would have been real estate focused. We wouldn't have been programming focused. So my really key learning is the independent organization and focus on the programming first, and then bring the place behind it.
Mm-hmm. So in regards to the success that that really propelled LACI forward, you said it was the fact that it was an independent organization. Can you talk a little bit about what that setup was and how you brought public and private industry to the table to really create this kind of an engine that pushed LACI forward?
Well, LACI was a brainchild of the previous mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa. He set the long-term vision for the city of Los Angeles. And because of that, the mayor's team really started to drive the creation of LACI. And when it was formed as an independent organization, it still wanted all of the connections and resources of the city, but it didn't want any of that red tape. So it was a good combination of policy and the public side with entrepreneurs. So everybody that was in that organization was in fact an entrepreneur. That's what we did. We were used to building organizations. And not only were we able to build LACI very quickly, relative speaking, I think we increased the budget by 10x in 6 years, but we were also able to help companies because we actually knew what companies needed to grow because we'd been there. And so we immediately focused on very practical advice to entrepreneurs where they couldn't find it anywhere else. So for instance, if you were going to get an investment, one of the first steps in an investment is a term sheet. A term sheet, being able to evaluate a term sheet is a very important thing because they can be really good or bad. Well, when I started my company, I didn't know anything about a term sheet. The first time I'd ever seen a term sheet was when somebody pushed it across the table. So if we can give folks the really real world advice and counsel and work to help them build a company, that made a difference. So for LACI, it was a partnership with the city, not a command and control kind of thing. That was incredibly important. And secondly, those of us who started LACI were in fact entrepreneurs, and we knew how to build companies. Therefore, we knew how to help people who wanted to build companies.
So switching back to the idea of fostering an entrepreneurial spirit in our youth, if some youth don't have access or inspiration perhaps to a mentor or entrepreneur, what should they do? And are there community organizations or places where youth should pay attention or that they should pay attention to get inspired?
Well, let me answer the second question first. I believe the biggest reason that technology entrepreneurs and companies have a much lower percentage of women and people of color in them is not because of capabilities, but it's really because of being around and being aware of and being able to participate in those programs, which are generally not in the same areas that those folks live. So being able to reach into the communities where people of color live and reach into the communities where women are connected, okay, is a key to, in fact, helping them become entrepreneurs. So at LACI, I formed the very first Women in Cleantech Entrepreneurs Task Force, and that was the beginning of, well, how do we start to really open this place up for women? And we hire women entrepreneurs in residence, and now we have while we're not where we need to be, it's a much more diverse organization because of those kinds of. But you have to make the effort, and you have to reach out into those communities. In terms of the first question, that's probably more difficult to ask. You have to, no matter what color you are or what sex you are, to be a successful entrepreneur requires a degree of determination that's not common. So part of what I would say is one never gives up. You have to keep looking for those opportunities, keep searching, be aggressive, and don't be afraid. And when I was younger, perhaps social media wasn't around, and it wasn't as easy to reach out to folks and to find folks that could help. Now it's easier. Okay, and so I think that that's a really important thing to do, is to reach out and ask.
Yeah, and I think it goes.
No for an answer.
I guess the spirit of entrepreneurship is sometimes it could be equated to the spirit of determination. So I think it comes back to the ability to storytell and show people that it is possible. That actually goes back to something that Jane Oates, who works at Working Nation, she was on our talent panel. She was talking about really being able to show people who look like them or are maybe representative of a particular culture that, hey, this is possible and this is what it can look like for you. So the last question in wrapping up for our live Q&A time is, it's kind of going to put you on the spot a little bit, but do you have a favorite company that was fostered out of LACI? And if so, what made it so special?
Oh, I have many favorite companies, so I'm not going to say which one, but I will tell you what they all were, same kind of characteristics. They all had a management team that really was curious about learning, and were willing to learn and to learn from their mistakes. We all make mistakes, especially when you're trying something new. And too often I come across young entrepreneurs who are, I don't know how else to say it, arrogant. And while it's a fine balance of being confident enough to go do something nobody else has done, but you have to also be receptive to ideas and learning. And the favorite companies I've had are management teams that were really curious, really quick to learn, and were totally dedicated. And I don't really care what kind of company they had. And in fact, in the early stages of these companies, it's very difficult to make a bet on what technology is going to work or not. You really make a bet on the management team. And so I think that resiliency, commitment, and curiosity is really, really important.
It always goes back to the people. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our Future Forward webinar today, Fred. We're thankful for just your investment in the greater Southern California area, but then more specifically Riverside. And now before we hear from our next speaker, Dr. Jeannie Kim, we wanted to show a quick year in review video that highlights the work that we've done at WRCOG in the past fiscal year. We are so honored to continue to serve our members, and we're excited for what's next. So take a look.
Excellent.
The Western Riverside Council of Governments, also known as WRCOG, is a regional government entity that strives to help its 23 member agencies work together to address important regional issues that transcend political and jurisdictional boundaries. Our sustainability framework guides and anchors the mission, identifying 6 goal areas: transportation, energy and environment, health, economy, education, and water. To the credit and leadership of WRCOG's members, fiscal year 2019-2020 was marked by major milestones for many of WRCOG's diverse programs. The Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee Program, a creative initiative to fund critical infrastructure to accommodate population growth, completed its 105th and largest project to date, the Cajalca Road Interchange. Like all 10th projects, this improvement will better connect the region and support transportation needs. WRCOG's grant writing program, which helps members prepare competitive grant applications, continued its success, yielding a 50-to-1 return on investment, with approximately $33 million being funneled to the region. The Regional Streetlight Program also reached a major milestone by completing its retrofit of nearly 55,000 streetlights to LED technologies. This will result in about $70 million in savings over 20 years. The Riverside County Habitat Conservation Agency launched a new program this past year called the Riverside Communities Partnership Program, which promotes environmental sustainability and collaboration through partnership with the AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps. WRCOG also continued its long-standing effort to invest in the future local workforce by administering the 4th round of the Public Service Fellowship Program, which provides 9 months of hands-on training to young professionals interested in public service. Notably, WRCOG's Clean Cities Coalition also helped coordinate the first ever SoCal AltCar event in the Inland Empire, which is nationally renowned for encouraging the education and use of alternative fuel vehicles, thus bringing new opportunities to the region. And lastly, Western Community Energy, the community choice aggregation, launched in April and May of 2020 in 6 participating jurisdictions, providing a choice to residents in the energy supply they receive, while also enabling local control over rate setting and customer programs. All of these achievements are only a glimpse of the many notable milestones reached by the region this past year. As we look forward to 2020, we are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with our members and partner agencies. So, what's next for WRCOG this next year?